Imagine waking up in the middle of nowhere. Your clothes aren't yours, your wallet, phone, and shoes are gone, and you have no idea how you got there. That's exactly what happened to two friends after a night at a Jersey Shore music festival. After drinks, sunrise found them robbed, clothed in strangers' garments, and no memory of how they got there. Their only clues were a handful of strange texts and a sense of dread that wouldn't go away. And in a rural Alabama back road, another 4th of July night would turn just as chilling. But first, let's go back to that morning, when one man opened his eyes to a world that didn't make sense. He woke up face down in the dirt, sunlight pressing hard against his closed eyes. For a moment, he lay there, not moving, just letting the smell of wet grass and the rough poke of twigs sink in. When he finally looked around, nothing was familiar. Trees crowded over him, their shadows flickering in the morning light. A bush nearby looked like it had been crushed by someone passing through. His head throbbed, and there was a hollow feeling in his gut as he tried to piece together what was happening. He realized right away that something was wrong with his clothes. The shirt he wore wasn't his. It was the wrong color, fit, and fabric, and he didn't remember ever owning anything like it. His jeans were gone, swapped for a pair of oversized athletic shorts that barely stayed up. His shoes were different too. Instead of his Nikes, he had on old, battered sneakers that didn't match. One shoe had a knot that wouldn't budge. The other's laces were missing altogether. Everything he wore felt random, like it had been picked out of a lost and found bin. Not a single thing belonged to him. He patted his pockets, hoping for some sign of his wallet or phone, but they were empty. The missing weight of his things made his stomach drop. Sitting up was a struggle. His arms were scratched, his legs stiff, his feet cold. His socks were soaked, and he could feel water squishing inside the shoes with every shift. It wasn't just his feet. His whole body was damp, like he'd been caught in rain or dragged through wet grass, but the sky above was clear. A wave of panic started to build. He couldn't remember anything after the music festival. No matter how hard he tried, the hours between the show and now were just gone. There were flashes, a crowd, lights, music, the echo of a car engine, maybe someone laughing, but nothing stuck together. It felt like his memory had been wiped clean, leaving just a few scattered images that didn't make sense. He couldn't tell if he'd been drinking too much or if something else had happened. He pushed himself to his feet, brushing off dirt and trying to get his bearings. There was no road, no sign of other people, just trees and overgrown grass stretching in every direction. He wondered if he'd wandered off with friends after the festival, but nothing fit. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the blank spot in his memory was too big to be from just alcohol. If it wasn't that, then what was it? With no better plan, he started walking. Every step felt heavy, and his wet shoes made squelching sounds that echoed in his ears. The woods seemed to close in around him, every sound and smell unfamiliar. He felt exposed, like he'd been left there on purpose. After what felt like forever, he finally reached the edge of the trees and saw a road. The blacktop shimmered in the sun, and just down the street, a 7-Eleven sign glowed in the daylight. It looked out of place, too normal compared to everything else. He crossed the road, feeling every awkward step as his shoes squished on the hot pavement. The blast of cold air from the store's air conditioning hit him as soon as he stepped inside. The cashier shot him a quick look but didn't say anything. He caught his reflection in the glass of a refrigerator door. Hair a mess, mud streaked across his neck, clothes that didn't fit. He looked like he'd been through something he couldn't explain. He leaned against the counter, trying to steady himself. He needed to contact someone, but he had no phone, no wallet, no idea what to do next. He walked up to the register, voice shaking as he asked, "Can I use your phone?" "It's kind of an emergency." The cashier hesitated for a second, then slid the store phone across the counter. Hands trembling, he dialed his sister's number, the only one he could remember. The phone rang twice before she answered. Her voice was a relief, even though he could hear the worry behind it. He tried to explain what happened, but the words tumbled out in pieces. The strange clothes, the woods, the missing hours. She told him to stay there and promised to come get him as soon as she could. He hung up, feeling a brief sense of relief that faded almost immediately. It was clear this wasn't just a bad night out. Someone had left him like this on purpose. The thought made his skin crawl. He sank into a corner of the store, waiting and trying to make sense of what had happened. Before he could catch his breath, something else happened that made the whole situation even stranger. The door chimed, and another familiar face from the festival walked in, looking just as lost and shaken. It was his friend, someone who, as he'd soon find out, had gone through almost the exact same ordeal. The two of them exchanged glances, realizing that whatever had happened, it hadn't just happened to one of them. That moment in the store was only the start. Each new clue would make things even stranger, and the questions would only pile up from there. Ryan's story started almost the same way, but some of his details made everything feel even stranger. He woke up in a cramped backyard, sprawled out like someone had just dropped him there and left him in the heat. His shirt was ripped along one sleeve, and his pants had smudges of dirt on both knees. At first, he thought maybe he'd crashed at a party and just forgotten, but the silence was too deep. There was no one around, no sign of any activity, and the stillness made him uneasy. He got to his feet and realized his wallet and phone were missing too. The last thing he could clearly remember was the festival lights. After that, his memory just cut out. When the man's sister finally picked him up from the 7-Eleven, his head was still spinning. She asked right away about Ryan, and that's when he realized he hadn't even thought to check. Ryan had been with him all night, right up until everything went black. He guessed Ryan was probably fine, maybe back at the rental house or already home. But with no way to contact him, the uncertainty started to build. His sister suggested they drive to the rental house to see if Ryan was there. When they arrived, Ryan's car was still parked outside, but inside, the place was empty. No Ryan, no bags or clothes left behind. It was like he'd just vanished. It took a mutual friend who still had Ryan's number saved to finally get in touch. When the man called, Ryan's voice sounded just as rattled. He'd woken up confused, alone, and just over 2 miles away from where the man had come to. "I don't remember anything," Ryan kept saying. "But my clothes, man, they weren't mine. It was like someone switched them while I was out." The two of them started comparing notes about the night, and the more they talked, the more things didn't add up. Both of their phones were missing, but neither of them remembered losing them. They knew from past concerts to keep their pockets zipped because of the crowds. At first, they figured maybe their phones had been stolen, but that theory didn't hold up when they tried using the Find My Phone feature on the man's sister's phone. The signal led them to a parking lot miles away from the festival, somewhere neither of them remembered being. They drove out to check and found the lot mostly empty, just a few cars passing by. Sitting out in the open under a utility pole, half hidden by gravel and trash, were both their phones. The screens were cracked and the batteries nearly dead, but they were still on. Seeing the phones just sitting there, in a place that meant nothing to either of them, made the whole thing feel planned. Who would go through the trouble of dumping their phones somewhere so random? Why not just keep them or throw them away? When they looked through the man's phone, it got even weirder. Everything looked normal at first, but when they checked the texts, there were messages he didn't remember sending. They were short, sent to numbers he didn't recognize, and most of them didn't make sense. Stuff like, "Here, now, safe," and "Wait, don't." Some were just fragments, almost like someone had tried to sound like him but didn't know what to say. It creeped him out, reading messages that sounded like his voice but didn't match anything he remembered doing. The more they talked, the more they realized how little they could actually remember. The man tried to piece together what happened right before the blackout. He remembered meeting Gianna and Marcella near the festival entrance. The women were friendly, easy to talk to, and quick to offer drinks. "Gianna handed me a cup and laughed," he said. "I didn't think anything of it. Why would I?" That was the last clear thing he remembered. The smell of sunscreen, the bass from the music, Gianna leaning in, and then nothing. Ryan couldn't remember much about the women either, but he agreed that things started to go wrong right after the drinks. That's when it hit them. They had probably been drugged. "Yeah," the man said later. "We had been drugged. That much was clear. The missing hours, the strange texts, the swapped-up clothes, and the way their bodies had felt, numb, flimsy, like they couldn't move, made it obvious. Both of them described the same feeling, like their legs had turned to rubber and their heads were too heavy to lift. What bothered them most was how deliberate everything seemed. The random clothes felt like a joke, or a way to make them feel powerless. And when they checked their credit card statements, there were no charges. They'd canceled the cards right away, but the fact that nobody had tried to use them made it even more confusing. If someone went through all this trouble, why not just steal their stuff and run? The fact that their wallets had been in someone else's hands for hours and nothing was spent didn't make sense. As they tried to put the pieces together, the whole thing just felt more and more planned. It wasn't just a wild night gone wrong. It was like someone had picked them out and set up the whole thing, right down to the smallest details. The unsettling clues, the phones dumped miles away, the strange texts, the swapped clothes, and the untouched cards kept piling up. They both knew they needed answers, but every time they thought they found a clue, it opened up more questions instead. With all these details, they decided they had to go to the police. It seemed like the only way to get any real answers, or maybe just a sense of safety again. They hoped someone would take them seriously, or at least help them make sense of what had happened. Inside the police station, the man and Ryan sat side by side, hands fidgeting on their knees, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The woman at the front desk listened as they described the night, their words coming out halting and uncertain. They tried to stick to the facts, waking up in strange places, wearing clothes that weren't theirs, with no wallets or phones, and no memory of how they got there. It sounded unbelievable, even to them, but they pushed through, hoping every detail might matter. An officer called them back, clipboard in hand, and led them into a small interview room. He started out attentive, asking them to walk through the timeline. The man described the festival, the two women, Gianna and Marcella, the drinks, and the sudden blackout that seemed to wipe his memory clean. Ryan jumped in with his own version, adding how he'd woken up alone, just over 2 miles away, with no idea what had happened. They talked about the odd text messages, the way their bodies felt wrong, and how their phones had been found dumped in a parking lot. The officer took notes, his face mostly blank, but at least he was listening. For a few minutes, it seemed like things might move forward. The officer asked about times, locations, and descriptions. He even asked for the names of the women. and they gave him everything they remembered. But as the questions continued, the officer's tone started to change. He asked, "How much did you have to drink that night?" The man hesitated, trying to recall. "A couple drinks, not enough to forget everything," he said, voice low. Ryan agreed, insisting the same. Still, the officer's pen slowed. The officer's questions shifted. "Is it possible you just wandered off and lost track of time? Maybe you got separated and panicked?" The man felt his stomach tighten. He'd expected this, but hearing it out loud made it worse. He tried to explain again that this wasn't just a night of partying gone wrong. The missing hours, the swapped clothes, the phones left miles away. None of it made sense if they'd just gotten drunk and stumbled around. The officer didn't seem convinced. When they mentioned the text messages, the ones neither of them remembered sending, the officer barely glanced at the phone. "You could have been messing around, texting friends," he said, not looking up from his notes. The man scrolled through the messages in front of him, hoping something would click, but the officer just shrugged. There was no follow-up, no sign that he thought it was unusual. The police had already helped them track their phones, using location data to find them in that empty parking lot. When the officers returned with both phones, cracked and nearly dead, it was treated like the end of the story. "You found your stuff. Maybe you just dropped it," the officer said. The wallets were gone, but that didn't seem to matter. No one had used their credit cards, so the police suggested they'd just lost them in the confusion. The man tried again, this time asking if they could get tested for drugs. He was sure something had been slipped into their drinks. The officer shook his head. "That kind of test needs to be done right away. Too much time has passed." There was no offer to check anyway, no interest in following up on the women or the beach house. The man felt his hope drain away with every answer. There was a moment where the man and Ryan looked at each other, both realizing that the conversation was over. The officer wrote their names and contact information on a business card. "If you remember anything else, give us a call." He handed the card over and stood up, signaling that the interview was done. That was it. No investigation, no follow-up, not even a promise to check on the women they'd met. It was as if the story had ended right there in that small, airless room. They left the station feeling more alone than ever. The police had made up their minds. Two guys drank too much, lost their things, and now wanted someone else to blame. It didn't matter how many details didn't add up, or how sure they were that something deliberate had happened. The officers had moved on, and now the man and Ryan were left with nothing but more questions. With no official backing and police unconvinced, they realized they were on their own, still wearing strangers' clothes with no answers. The only thing left was to follow the one lead they had, hoping it might explain what really happened that night. The beach house, the women, and the gaps in their memories were all they had left to chase. The search for answers was about to get even stranger. They decided the only thing left to do was go back to the beach house. It was the last place they could both remember being with Gianna and Marcella, and maybe, if they saw it in daylight, something would jog their memories or give them a clue they'd missed before. The drive there was quiet. Every street felt too familiar and too strange at the same time. Neither of them said much as they pulled up to the block, both just staring at the house that stood out from the rest. The place looked almost too perfect. The walls were bright white and smooth, the windows stretched wide and clean, and two abstract stone sculptures sat out front on their own pedestals. There was hardly anything else on the lawn, just neat grass and the sculptures, which caught the light in a way that made them look even more out of place. The whole thing felt like it was meant to be looked at, not lived in. Even the air felt different around that house. Cooler, quieter, like sound didn't travel the same way here. They waited outside for a minute, not sure if they should even go up to the door. The man tried to picture Gianna and Marcella standing on the steps, laughing and waving them inside, but the memory wouldn't come together. It was just bits and pieces, a flash of a smile, a hand pulling him by the wrist, music echoing from somewhere inside. He couldn't tell if the images were real or just his mind trying to fill in the blanks. Ryan finally nudged him, and they walked up the path together. There was no doorbell, just a heavy brass knocker shaped like an anchor. The man lifted it and let it fall against the wood. It made a deep sound that seemed to echo inside the house. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the door opened a crack, and an older man looked out at them. He was probably in his late 50s or early 60s, with thinning hair and glasses that slid down his nose. He didn't look surprised, but he didn't look friendly either. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat but polite. The man tried to sound calm. Sorry to bother you. We were here a couple nights ago, I think, with some friends. 2 girls named Gianna and Marcella. We're just trying to figure out what happened. We don't remember much, but..." The older man cut him off with a small laugh, almost like he thought it was a joke. "No one by those names lives here. I think you must be confused." He shook his head, still smiling a little, but his eyes didn't match the smile. "There wasn't any party here. You've got the wrong place." Ryan stepped forward, trying to be more direct. "We really think this is the house. We just want to know if you saw anyone that night, or if you know anything about 2 girls who might have been here." The man's expression didn't change much, but his patience seemed to run out. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," he said, his voice sharper now. "I don't know who you're talking about. You should probably leave." He started closing the door, but not before glancing over their shoulders at the street behind them. They stood on the porch for a few seconds after the door shut, listening to the quiet. The whole conversation had lasted maybe a minute, but it left both of them feeling worse than before. The man tried to replay the older man's words in his head, looking for any hint of a lie or a clue, but all he got was the sound of that little laugh and the door closing in their faces. As they walked back to the car, the man kept turning the conversation over in his mind. The house was exactly how he remembered it. Sleek white walls, big windows, the strange sculptures. But the denial from the man inside made him question everything. Was it possible they'd gotten the address wrong? Were their memories that unreliable? Or was the older man hiding something? It was impossible to know for sure. They sat in the car for a while, watching the house. It looked empty, but too perfect, almost staged. The sculptures on the lawn didn't look like anything you'd see in a normal neighborhood. The more he stared, the more he felt like the house was meant to keep secrets. Ryan finally broke the silence. "Do you think he was lying?" he asked. The man didn't answer right away. He wanted to say yes, but he couldn't prove it. Everything about the morning felt just as foggy as the night before. He looked at the windows, half expecting to see someone looking back at him. And then, for just a second, he thought he saw a curtain move, just a quick flick, like someone had been watching them and then stepped away. He blinked, but the window was still again. It was such a small thing, but it made his heart race. He didn't say anything about it. Ryan started the car, and they drove off without another word. The house faded in the rearview mirror, but the feeling of being watched stayed with them. Even as the road curved away and the neighborhood disappeared, the tension didn't lift. In the days that followed, The unanswered questions stuck with them, growing heavier. And miles away, someone else was about to find out just how quickly a normal night can turn into something you never forget. Ariel's story started with the drive home from a 4th of July cookout in rural Alabama. The night had been quiet, the kind where fireworks fade out over empty fields and everyone heads home before it gets too late. She was used to these roads, long, dark, and lined with thick trees that pressed in on both sides. There were hardly any houses, and the only lights came from her own headlights and the occasional porch lamp far off the road. She didn't expect anything out of the ordinary, just a slow, lonely drive back to her place. It wasn't until she noticed the car behind her that she felt anything was off. It was a gray Nissan Altima, its lower half streaked with mud, and it had shown up out of nowhere. At first, she just caught its headlights in her rear view, not thinking much of it. Maybe someone else was leaving a party late, same as her. But as she kept driving, the car stayed locked in behind her, matching her every move. She sped up a little, and the Nissan did too. She slowed down for a curve, and it slowed down right behind her. Every time she checked her mirror, it was there, never falling back, never passing. Ariel tried to convince herself it was nothing, but her hands started to sweat on the wheel. She tested it again, making a sudden turn onto a residential road that branched off the main route. The Nissan followed right after, not even hesitating. That's when she realized this wasn't just another driver on the same road. She was being followed, and the feeling of being alone out there made her heart pound harder. The darkness outside the car felt even thicker, like the woods were closing in. She kept driving, trying to think of a plan. Her mind raced through every possible explanation, but none of them made her feel any better. She thought about calling the police, but out there with barely any cell signal and no idea how close help might be, it felt pointless. She felt too exposed to stop, too scared to pull over, and every mile made her more certain that whoever was behind her had picked her on purpose. Then she glanced down and saw the gas gauge. The needle was barely above empty. She hadn't filled up before the cookout, thinking she'd have enough to get home. Now, with every mile she drove, she worried she'd run out of gas before she could get away. The idea of breaking down on the side of that empty road, with the Nissan right behind her, made her grip the wheel even tighter. She tried to remember if there were any gas stations close by, but nothing came to mind. All she could do was keep going and hope for a break. The Nissan stayed glued to her bumper, never letting up. She tried weaving a little, slowing down and then speeding up, but it didn't matter. The car matched her every move, never more than a few lengths behind. Every time she looked in the mirror, she could see the outline of the driver, but the windows were too dark to make out a face. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, except she was running out of places to hide. Finally, just as her nerves were about to snap, she saw the glow of a gas station up ahead. It was small, just 2 pumps and a little store with the lights off, but it was the only sign of life she'd seen in miles. She pulled in fast, parking right under the brightest light, as close to the security camera as she could get. She didn't even think about filling her tank. She just wanted to be somewhere public, somewhere visible. The Nissan rolled in behind her, but instead of pulling up to a pump, it stopped at the edge of the lot, engine idling. The driver didn't get out, didn't even move. Ariel sat there, frozen, watching the car in her mirrors. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. She kept glancing at the store, hoping someone would come out, but the place stayed dark. The Nissan didn't budge. Ariel tried to steady her breathing, telling herself not to panic, but the fear kept growing. She wondered if she should try to make a run for it, but the idea of leaving the safety of the lights made her feel even more trapped. Eventually, the Nissan crept forward, rolling slowly past the pumps and out onto the road. It didn't speed off or make any sudden moves, just slipped away into the darkness like it had never been there at all. Ariel waited a few more minutes, making sure the car was really gone, then started her engine and drove home. She didn't relax until she was parked in her own driveway, the house lights shining through the windows. It wasn't until weeks later that the real weight of that night hit her. A friend sent her a news story about 2 men wanted for armed robbery and attempted murder. The article mentioned a gray Nissan Altima, muddy along the bottom, last seen on the same roads Ariel had driven that night. The timing matched, the location matched, and the car was exactly what she'd seen in her mirror. She realized then just how close she'd come to something much worse. The only thing that had kept her safe was pulling into that gas station and staying in the light. Even now, the fear lingers. She still drives those same roads, but she checks her mirrors more often, keeps her gas tank full, and never forgets how quickly a normal night can turn into something you carry with you long after it's over. Some experiences just don't fade, no matter how much time passes. For the man and Ryan, the dread didn't fade when they got home. It took on a new shape, settling in and sticking around. They went over the details again and again, searching for anything that might help them make sense of what happened. The feeling that someone had targeted them on purpose made it impossible to relax. The man found himself stuck on the strange messages from his phone, words like safe and wait, that seemed to taunt him every time he read them. He'd scroll through them late at night, hoping something would click. But it never did. Ryan tried to do the opposite. He wanted to forget, to put the whole thing away and move on. But the more he tried, the more the memories found their way back, usually when he least expected it. There was a new kind of paranoia in their lives. And it wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what could happen next. The man noticed it first when he was out in public. Crowded places felt different now. He caught himself scanning every face, flinching at sudden noises, and feeling his heart speed up for no real reason. Even walking down the street after dark became a challenge. He checked behind him more than once, always listening for footsteps or a car slowing down. Ryan felt it too. He stopped going out at night unless he had to. The two of them talked about it once and realized they both had the same habits. Double-checking locks, glancing over their shoulders, and always wondering if someone was watching. They both knew it wasn't just fear. It was the sense that they'd lost control, that something bad could happen at any time, and they might never see it coming. The missing hours, the strange clothes, the texts, and the way their phones had ended up miles away, all of it made them feel like the world was less safe than they'd believed. Even familiar places seemed different now, and the questions they couldn't answer kept them on edge. They wanted to believe it was a one-time thing, but they couldn't shake the feeling that someone out there still knew more than they did. Ariel's experience changed her in ways she hadn't expected. She used to enjoy the quiet of those Alabama back roads, but now she avoided them whenever she could. She'd plan her routes in advance, sticking to main roads even if it took longer. She started carrying pepper spray in her bag, and she kept her phone charged and ready whenever she left the house. At home, she checked that the doors were locked, even in the middle of the day. She'd catch herself glancing out the window, looking for anything out of place. It wasn't just nerves. It was her mind always running through what-ifs. What if the car had followed her home? What if she hadn't found the gas station? What if she hadn't been so lucky? Ariel noticed that her habits had changed in small ways too. If a car stayed behind her for more than a few minutes, she'd pull over and wait for it to pass. She'd park under streetlights or in busy lots instead of darker spots. When friends asked her to meet up, she'd check the route twice before saying yes. She didn't talk about it much, but the fear was always there, just under the surface. She knew it wasn't just in her head. After seeing that news story about the fugitives and the car, she realized how close she'd come to danger she couldn't have predicted. The man and Ryan's lives shifted in quiet ways too. The man started avoiding places where he might lose track of time or where crowds could press in. He kept his phone close and didn't share his location with anyone unless he trusted them completely. Ryan thought about the parking lot where they found their phones, the cracked screens and drained batteries, and pictured someone standing there, watching them. It made him wary of sharing details about his life online or letting people know where he'd be. Both of them felt like they'd lost something. Maybe just the belief that bad things only happen to other people. They all shared a sense of unfinished business. The man and Ryan never learned who Gianna and Marcella really were or why they'd been singled out. Ariel never found out if the driver of the Nissan Altima was the same person from the news. The lack of answers made everything feel heavier. It wasn't just about what happened, but about what they didn't know. Every time they thought about that night, new questions surfaced. Was it just bad luck? Or was it something more? Would it happen again? Or was it over for good? The uncertainty made it hard to let go. The psychological impact of not knowing left them all more cautious. They trusted people a little less, paid more attention to their surroundings, and took extra steps to keep themselves safe. Hypervigilance became part of their routines. For the man, it was checking every lock before bed. For Ryan, it was turning off location sharing on his apps. For Ariel, it was keeping her pepper spray within reach and choosing her routes with care. Their stories weren't just about fear. They were about learning to live with the unknown and never letting their guard down. All three walked away alive, but none walked away with closure. The questions lingered, and so did the feeling that the world was more unpredictable than they'd ever realized. That sense of dread and uncertainty followed them, shaping the way they saw everything that came after. Some experiences stay with you, not because of what you know, but because of what you never will. The man, Ryan, and Ariel each faced moments when the ordinary turned dangerous without warning. Their stories show how quickly control can slip away, sometimes from something as simple as a drink at a party or a car that won't stop following you on a quiet road. Unpredictability hides in everyday moments, and sometimes the only thing you have is your own gut feeling. Next time you accept a random drink or drive alone at night, remember their stories and trust that uneasy feeling. If you've ever had an unexplained encounter or close call, share it in the comments. And if you want more true horror stories, hit subscribe.